Hello, everybody. It's Handbeer again, along with my emotional support FFR Thagrea and this acrylic keychain of Kita from Bochi the Rock. Anyways, I am doing a deck profile today because I got a new webcam that is hopefully nicer looking than my old one, so I can give you that dank desk content. God, I sound so fucking old. Anyways, I did run a poll on Twitter just asking people if they preferred, like, deck log profiles or, like, IRL cards, and it seems like the majority of people were trending more towards physical cards, which I think I also prefer. Like, I've been doing deck log profiles more recently, particularly because Atlas likes doing them, but I don't know, something about it never quite clicked with me. I think it's because of the way that like decklog is laid out. Everything is in strict grade order, whereas I kind of like to be able to jump around different cards and talk about different things in what I feel is like order of importance. And so having physical cards makes it easier to do that. It also makes it easier to bring in like alternate tech cards. So if I have want to discuss like, okay, this is like an alternative option that you can consider, I can just pull that card in, whereas with deck log there's like a strict limit on how many cards you can have in a given deck, so it's harder for me to put in all of the tech options I want to discuss. I'd have to like create a second profile and then flip between tabs. It's just kind of more inconvenient. I think the advantage of deck log is that you can read the cards more easily. I don't think this is particularly legible right now if you're watching it on screen, but and it's overall just a bit like cleaner, a bit nicer, but for my presentation style, I think I prefer desk footage. But anyways, I digress. Let's get on with the deck profile. So today we are discussing Favrneel. You might have already seen the deck opening that I did for it when I bought the deck set. So we're going to talk about my actual list today. It is going to be a little bit copium because Eligos is unfortunately a one-of in the product, and I am not about to pay $30 for it. But, we'll get to that. So, first up, I am running the Bruce ride line, similar to what they were doing in Deer Days. Like, there are some other options, like the Astroya ride line, you can soul charge too, and if you happen to soul charge a crit, you can draw a card. Or, like, the Omina Gruzo ride line has a similar thing where, like, if you do everything, you can just, like, soul charge and then potentially also draw a card, but you have to like get rid of a trigger in the process, so I'm like a little bit hesitant on that. you know this one you soul charge one and you can draw a card, but whereas all the other ones you can like soul charge two, but it's kind of at that trade-off where like, okay, the Astroya grade 2 doesn't do anything, like neither I think the Omina Gruzo grade 2 does, is the one that like gives you the additional draw, where if you don't search the Omina Gruzo, and that's kind of how you get like the additional soul charges going. But like for the grade 1, I think you have to soul charge a trigger. Actually, I think I have it with me. Let me go grab it real quick. See, isn't this so much better than deck log? I can just go over to my cabinet and just grab the cards I have. So yeah, so the grade 2 is like you can search your deck for a trigger unit, put it into soul, and then if you do that you can draw a card. And then the grade 1 is you can Soul Blast, look at top 5 for an Omina Gruzo, put it to your hand. If you didn't put anything, you Soul Charge 2. So, because Favrneel cares more about the grades of the cards than the actual number of cards, you can like Soul Blast the grade 0, doesn't affect your soul count, you get a definite Soul Charge 2, and then for the cost of filtering a trigger out of your deck, you can also draw a card with the grade 2 Omina card. So that's like an alternative option. I haven't quite tested it with that yet. I've kind of stuck with the Bruce ride line, but that's something to consider, right? Like if I'm willing to filter out one of my triggers just to like get more soul charging. But I digress. It kind of remains to be seen. I haven't fully tested this deck out at locals yet. Maybe we'll do an updated profile later on. That's always been something I've thought about doing, where I have like a kitchen lab video where I give out my initial planned list, take it through to locals, kind of test it out, and then like report back on it and give updates for what I think would be better. So, maybe we'll do that. We'll see. Next up, we have the Persona Riders. So, because the gimmick of Favrneel is that you can only have one copy of him, you need other ways to be able to activate Persona, right? I'm just gonna move Kita here real quick. I guess I should actually read what Favrneel does, huh? I'm doing really good at this deck profile right now, but at the beginning of your main phase, your opponent retires one of their rear guards, and then if you didn't ride this turn, it gets 10k and a crit. When a rear guard is retired during your turn, you can put a card from hand into soul and draw, and then at the end of the battle attacks, if the sum of dark states in your soul is 13 or more, sum of grades of dark states is 13 or more, you can counterblast 2, stand it, get drive -1, so it's actually a pretty powerful restander. You don't have to discard anything. And from turn 4 onwards, if you don't ride, it just has 10k and a crit, which means it has a ton of restand pressure, because you can go like 22 with a crit, or 23 with a crit, sorry. Restand 23 with a crit again, boosted becomes 31. If you throw in Persona Ride, can become like 33, 41. So, yeah, that's Favrneel. Would probably be good to actually tell you what the boss unit of this deck actually does. So, anyways, as I said, you can only have one copy of Favrneel, which means you need alternate methods to Persona Ride. So there is Purgatory Baron Hrodus. So what he does is, like, at the end of the battle attacks, if you have a Vanguard with Favrneel, you can put it into Soul and retire an opponent's rear guard. So this can help build up your grade count to get to 13, and it also just retires an opponent's card, which is always pretty nice. And then in the Soul, at the beginning of your ride phase, if you have Vanguard with Favrneel, you can bind it from the Soul and discard a card from your hand to activate Persona Ride, and then you can't activate Persona Ride from other card effects, and you can't ride. So this is kind of one of your methods for activating Persona Ride to kind of get more power onto Favrneel. It's also just a decent rear guard, being able to, like, trade 1-for-1 with your opponent's card and build up your grade counts. I'm also playing an additional copy of the Grail. Hrodus does have his drawbacks, Having to bind him out of the soul means you can lower your grade count. You also have to discard an additional card to get it. The Grail has kind of a similar problem where it's like, okay, you're getting the Persona Ride, but you do have to commit playing an extra card for it, so it kind of works out the same way. But there are just times where it's like, I don't think I can afford to, like, lose the grades in my soul right now, where the Grail feels a bit preferable, so I am running it. Next up, the Copium part of my list. So, we have Demonic Swordsman of Riving, Eligos. So it's a grade 3, when it attacks a Vanguard, if you have a Vanguard with Favrneel in its name, you put another rear guard into Soul, choose one of your opponent's rear guards, retire it, and then, if your grades are 13 or more, you can countercharge, which is very important in this deck, because you'll notice that Favrneel says Counterblast 2. So this card does a lot, It's additional forms of retire, which you can then use to proc Favrneel's draw effect and filter your hand. It's countercharging, which you desperately... My headset died again, so anyways, as I was saying with Eligos, this is a very important card because, again, putting a rearguard into Soul helps you build up that grade count. It's a retire, which you can use to, like, activate Favrneel's effect, further filter your hand, build up your grades. And of course, retiring an opponent's rearguard is just always a useful ability, and it's countercharging, which is desperately needed because you counterblast 2 to restand. The Copium part comes from the fact that the stand-up deck set only has one copy of this bastard, which means it's like a $30 card right now on TCG Player. Excuse me. So, I'm not about to spend $90 to upgrade a mediocre pet deck, so I'm just gonna have to cope on 3 additional copies of Selfish Engraver. A very old card, you're probably familiar with it. On hit, you can soul charge 1, and then at the end of the battle it attacks. If your soul has 10 or more cards, you put it into soul, counter charge. So the problem with this is just trying to get to 10 cards in soul, because Favrneel cares more about quality than quantity. As long as you reach grade 13, like, it doesn't matter the strict number of cards in your soul. So the problem with Selfish Engraver is just, like, sometimes I don't actually have 10 cards in my soul for the counter charge. So You know, in an ideal world, I would just have 4 copies of Eligos, but that's not happening right now because it was a one-of and never got a proper promo printing. Because it was a promo in Japan, the deck set got announced not too long after it came out, and then because we never got the FFR promo of Favrneel in English, they never printed Eligos for us because there was no reason to print a card for an archetype that doesn't yet exist. So yeah, $30 card. Thanks, Bushiroad. Next up, we have our Soul Chargers. So I am running 3 copies of Ling, so on play, you look at your top 2 cards, one into Soul, one on the bottom of your deck. Again, because Favrneel cares about quality over quantity, being able to selectively Soul Charge things with like higher grade so you can get to the grade 13 is very nice as opposed to just like blind Soul Charging. After that, I'm playing 2 copies of Brainwash Swirler and 2 copies of Gungarum. So Brainwash Swirler is just on play Soul Charge 1, and then when you Soul Charge a card and your Vanguard is grade 3, it gets 5k. So the problem with Brainwash Swirler is just like, you know, you have cards like Hrodis, like Eligos, like Favrneel's own ability, where you put cards into your soul directly. You're not like soul charging. So it's like, yeah, you need the soul charging just to be able to like get the grades, but you don't actually get to proc the plus 5k as often as you like, which is why I kind of cut down to 2 copies of it. And then 2 copies of Gungarum, so again, on play Soul Charge 1, and then you can Soul Blast 3 to draw a card. So in situations where you just blind Soul Charge with like this and Brainwash Swirler, you could end up in a situation where you only Soul Charge grade 0s, and so you can just like get rid of those, it doesn't impact your grade count, and you can try to dig deeper for more like effective cards that you can use to build up your grade count. Next up, 4 copies of Squalid Freaks. So this is a grade 2. It was originally a promo, but it did come as a 4 of in the deck set, thank God. So in your soul, if you didn't ride, it gets grade plus 2, so this is a way to build up your grade count for Favrneel's effect. And then when your grade 3 or greater Vanguard attacks, if you didn't ride, you can bind it, and all of your front row units get 5k. So, you know, because you're not Persona riding consistently, this is a way for you to build up power, and honestly, even if you do Persona ride, as you can see, I'm playing a bunch of cards that don't actually gain power on their own, so the 5k from Squalid Freaks can help build up your numbers. It's also just a good way to build up Favrneel itself. The downside to that, of course, is that once you start getting to grade 4, or turn 4, you know, you're gonna need Squalid Freaks to, like, build up your soul count because it's, like, grade 4, technically speaking. And so sometimes you could be in a position where it's like, oh, I have 13 exactly, I can't afford to get rid of Freaks right now because that brings me down to, like, 9. Which is very unfortunate. Or it's a thing where it's like, oh yeah, I'm at, like, grade 15 right now, but only because of Squalid Freak, so if I get rid of it, I'm down to like 11, and I have to make up for that somehow, so you do have to be a little bit careful about when you bind it for the 5k. You know, there are definitely times where it's like, I want to do the effect and get more power, but I don't know that I can afford to do it. Similar to like Hrodis, where like, I want to activate the Persona ride, but sometimes I can't afford it. Next, like 2 copies of Ashur Dar. So this just came in the deck set. I'm rolling with it because Favrneel has kind of middling hand sizes, so I figure just having an additional 10k shield is nice, plus it puts itself into soul when retired from guard circle. So it's the kind of thing where if you draw it early and your opponent's being aggressive, you can like guard with it, put it into soul, get that grade count up by 2. Next up, we have Time Jarrett Dragon. So originally, I wanted to run Zailmort because I think it's just a better effect. So Time Jarrett Dragon is like, when placed on rearguard circle, you put a card from hand to soul, draw a card, so it lets you filter your hand, and again, building up that quality of grades for Favrneel. So originally I liked Zailmort more, so this one says Counterblast 1, put it into soul, look at top 2 cards, call 1 to rearguard circle, put the rest into your soul. So it's a potential like 2 for 1, right? Like you get plus 3 grades from Zailmort, and then you can look at your top 2 and potentially get like more grades, plus, you know, it replaces itself. The problem is like, one, this deck does play a lot of cards that you don't necessarily want to call. Like, Freaks, you're better off just keeping in Soul. You know. Uh, Ling is, like, okay. Hrodis, like, kind of okay since it puts itself into Soul. But, like, sometimes you can just miss on Zailmort. But the main reason why I'm choosing to replace it with Time Jarrett in this build is one copy of Elagos. Like I said, Selfish Engraver is a bit of an inconsistent soul charge because I don't always have 10 soul available. And so, as much as I like Zailmort and what it does, I just cannot afford to have the additional counterblast in the deck right now. And then finally, 2 copies of Laymina, the cycle card from set 10. So, early on, the ability to, like, cycle it where you put it to the bottom of the deck and then draw a card is nice. Again, grade 0s don't really count for Favrneel's effect, so you can just Soul Blast your grade 0 starter, draw a card. I'm not sure I like this card, though, because, again, one copy of this motherfucker. So, don't always have the counterblast available, don't always want to call something out of my soul because it'll lower my grade count. This is just kind of there because I'm not sure what else to put in its place. Like, you kind of want to have a balance of different grades to get your grade count going. Like, I could conceivably replace it with copies of Zailmort. I could potentially put Clean Sweep Dragon in there because Clean Sweep can act as removal, or in emergency situations, you can eat your own cards to get your grade count. I could just be like more copies of Brainwash Swirler and Gungrum, more copies of Ling. Like, this seems like a flex spot. I see a lot of other people playing it, which is why I want to try it out, but I'm not super confident in it myself, if I'm being perfectly honest. This seems like something I could easily replace. Also, I have the FFR. So yeah, those 6 cards are kind of my, like, flex spots right now. I think, like, Hrodis is pretty non-negotiable. The Grail you could maybe replace with other things, like additional copies of Brainwash Swirler. I think I like the current ratio of Soul Chargers. Maybe I could stand to have, like, one more copy of Gungrum or Brainwash. I wish I had 4 copies of Elagos. Selfish and... in a world where you already have 4 copies of Elagos, I could easily see, like, 2 copies of Selfish Engraver over Laymina. Because you have that, like, early on hit pressure where you can get the soul charge, and could potentially be just, like, extra countercharging in situations where you actually do have the 10 soul. And then, of course, we have kind of the no-brainers that we don't really need to talk about. 4 Sentinels. Ideally, I would replace one of these with Sanctitude, but the downside of physical cards, I only have the 1 copy of Sanctitude, and I don't know which deck it's in right now. Next up, triggers. OT. I'm just playing the Dark States OT right now because it's what I have on hand. I've seen, like, every other OT being considered, like the original Olbaria that just gives 2 things 100 million because your rear guards kind of suck. Could also play, like, the blue one just to bring back cards like, I don't know, maybe a Squalid Freaks ended up in your drop zone somehow. You want to bring it back. This is a contender just, like, making Favrneel even stronger. If you could just be like, alright, it's 33k with 3 criticals. So, like, I could see arguments for, like, all of the OTs if I'm being perfectly honest. Also, if you happen to check it, like, really early, it means you could get the crit pressure, like, from turn 3. If you check it at, like, grade 1 or 2, which is nice. Of course, we're going for heals. I have, like, 1 each of the effect heals, like... I don't see Gondiva as much recently. I might drop the crit heal since it's not as... It feels like it's not going to be as relevant in the future. I don't know, it's weird, because it's like... Youthberg still gets a crit, and it doesn't restand anything, so it doesn't trigger the other heal. Like, Drajul kind of triggers both. What's her name? Leonorn only triggers the restand one, so... I don't know, it's weird, because it's just like, sometimes these don't work. I've seen decks that play all of them, that play none of them, but for now, I'm just going, like, 1 each, plus, like, 2 differently named heals, because I like being weird. Also, I just ripped this from a Chaos deck that ultimately didn't work out for me. I just ended up not really liking it, so... you're going to see me playing a bunch of cards that have different names for basically no reason. Anyways, I'm playing 3 draws. Like, draw triggers are just nice. I want to be able to, like, draw additional cards because Favrneel doesn't really do that too well on his own. Like, you can filter for a lot of cards, but, like, true plussing is really just, like, the restand, not... The fact that you don't have to discard for the restand is kind of how you plus, right? Like, your Persona rides a net 0. You can kind of plus off of, like, Gungram. But yeah, so it's like Gungram's draw ability, which you can only use sometimes, and like the additional drive from Favrneel restanding. And then finally, just 8 criticals. They're all different names because, again, I ripped it from Chaos, so I'm playing all the Bang Dream crits, but it's 8 criticals. I don't think the effect crit really matters too much for anything, really, and this deck in particular, you don't actually need the soul that much, right? So, yeah, that is the deck. Also, I do have the signed and stamped Bang Dream crit. I had 2 of them in my box of set 11, if you remember the set opening. I don't know if that's a normal thing. I did sell off one of them, and I'm keeping this one because no one has asked me for it yet. So, yeah, that is going to be it for this video. If you liked it, leave a like, leave a comment. If you want to support the show, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/nexusatnight. $5 gets you a whole ass bonus show, $10 gets you early access to videos. We also have a promo code at night at 50cards.shop. So thank you for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.